That's pretty much the only reason why.
It's it's also because they were all Protestant converts coming in during this time, and they were actually the catechesis for all of Catholicism during this time. So you have to remember the Scott Hahn's coming in, the Jeff Caven's coming in, the like that whole group of guys. You have Steve
Ray,
Stephen Ray. So all these guys convert from Protestantism, right? And when they come here, to them, it's the most orthodox, solid foundation. And the liturgy doesn't bother them at all because they're coming from Protestantism, right? So to them, it's, oh, this is the Holy Mass. And, you know, this is where heaven meets earth. They don't even, Nick, I grew up in it. I didn't know, but I do remember like learning the theology of the Mass and then going to Mass and having such a giant disconnect.
Yeah.
Saying, how is this where heaven meets earth? I mean, it's just, but then when I finally went to the Latin Mass saying, oh, this is what I learned about, like that does happen, right? So I think the nostalgia is John Paul II did stand up to communism at the time. Like these are older guys who saw communism in Russia and Poland, and then they saw the Berlin Wall come down. They saw Gorbachev shaking when he shook John Paul II's hand. Like John Paul II, before the abuse crisis, was a towering man. He was a figure of authority. You have to think about how much authority the church lost.
For all the Zoomers out there, he had Riz.
He did. He had Riz. He was a young pope. He came in. Before the abuse crisis, the Catholic Church still held a really big moral authority in the world. So when John Paul II, he was the most pro-life, outspoken pro-life leader of his time, talking about the culture of death. These things resonated with that generation. The Pope Paul VI was such a disaster. The faith collapses under him. John Paul II salvages it, believe it or not. So
all he did was manage to halt the train a little bit. It's like, because I'll just give you just one quote right here.
To be fair, oh, son of a.
So this is one thing I was reading the other day.
To make a fair comparison, could we not also say that about your man, Donald Trump?
Oh, no, 100. I was actually going to use that as an example.
Okay.
I was actually going to use that as an example. But I was going to say, so listen to this quote. So this comes from one of his encyclicals, Redemptor Hominis, and it goes with my subtitle right here. He says this, quote, and this comes from paragraph number 6 of Redemptor Hominis, quote, "Does it not sometimes happen that the firm belief of those professing non-Christian religions, which also itself proceeds from the Spirit of truth operating outside the visible confines of the mystical body, can make Christians ashamed at being oftentimes themselves so disposed to doubt concerning the truths revealed by God," end quote. So in this statement, right alone, he says that the Spirit of truth proceeds and is in non-Christian religions.
Okay, so let me ask you something.
What the absolute?
I'm going to ask you something, honestly. A person is living a debauched life. They hear a Christian pastor give a sermon and do the altar call, and they give their life to Jesus Christ. That's not the Spirit of truth working in that. Like, I'm not trying to make a humanism or anything. I'm just like, you can make that statement work is all I'm saying. Like, your original conversion and your love for Jesus was the Spirit of truth working in your life. It just hadn't come to fulfillment yet.
Except that statement's not saying things within those religions. It's saying those religions themselves
are inspired by the Spirit of Christ. I have another quote if you guys want me to pull it up later, but I have another quote where it talks about that the Spirit of God moved the founders of other religions in the establishing of their rights. That's rough.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to make excuses for any of that.
But to answer your point, so it's like I get this all the time. Like, okay, you have baptism outside of the church, you have the Bible outside of the church. These are obviously good things, right? Salvific things. Like, what do we do with that? The traditional Catholic understanding before Vatican II was that all of those things, right? The Bible, baptism, an altar call, if you will, you can call that like an act of faith, act of contrition, whatever, are stolen from the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
They're the Catholic Church's by right, and they're stolen. And
all valid baptism is Catholic baptism.
Yeah, and if there is any type of salvific work going on, it is in spite of their false religion, as opposed to the Spirit of God moving in the religion or inspiring the founders of the religions, etc. So what and I get this. So it's like you bring up a good point, Anthony. There's a lot that John Paul II on a social, natural level that he did was very, very good. And I don't criticize him for that. I've never criticized him for those things. But it's this reality where he continues to push Catholic humanism, if you can call it that, which is this man-centered worldview. I mean, it's like you look again at theology of the body. Theology of the body, there's a lot of good in it, but it is all 1000% focused on man for the most part. It's never about like this violates God's law.
Okay, but it also did help to teach Catholics about birth control, right? They were under assault where they were just no catechesis whatsoever on birth control. And that phrase that he came up with, where it's he basically said in his phenomenological explanation was, if a person is using birth control, what they are doing is withholding some of themselves from their spouse, and Christ gives himself completely to us. So if Christ is the bridegroom and the church is the bride, the bridegroom gives himself completely. He withholds nothing. So for a lot of Catholics, that catechesis worked for them, right? So a lot of people that resonated with them. It was just a way of his talking, right? And it's this flowery nonsense that you get after the council. It's in every single pope since that. Even today, everybody's ranting and raving about Francis's encyclical today. Listen to what he says here. The gospel tells us Jesus came to his own. Those words refer to us. For the Lord does not treat us as strangers, but as a possession that he watches over and cherishes. No, those words, the Lord came into his own, is specifically about the Jews. He came into his own and his own rejected him.
Yeah.
That's what that is from, right? Then there's another one. Let's see. Christ showed the depth of his love for us, not by lengthy explanations, but by concrete actions. Like that's that St. Francis preach the gospel and use words when necessary. No, like you're discounting the Sermon on the Mount. You're discounting all the times Christ gave concrete words to the Pharisees. Like it wasn't just his actions. Yeah, his actions, of course, but his words are what, I mean, every Bible has Christ's words in red for a reason. It wasn't just by his actions. It wasn't just by healing the lepers and things like that. It was the things that he said. And at a lot of times it was very uncomfortable things that he said. So it's this whitewashing of our faith that they've been doing for a very long time. And we get a little morsel of orthodoxy from Francis, and everybody's gonna and it's
if you have to dig to find orthodoxy,
there's nothing,
then you're digging.
I had to dig in this one to find something I didn't like. I had to dig in this one to find something I didn't like. I think I do think this document is a good document. It's just you have that flowery bullshit.
It's just very loose, strict theological language.
Correct.
Here's my question, and this is just something to think about. It's like, so when it comes to birth control as an example, do you think that the people in the time of John Paul II and even today are ignorant on the church's teachings on specifically the following: abortion, contraception, and homosexuality? Because I would argue that while it's understandable that there's there's 1000% a lack of catechesis in certain areas, it's not those areas. Like those areas, they know, and
Nick, it's not a lack of catechesis. It's horrible catechesis.
I think they know what the church teaches and they just reject it.
Okay, no, because maybe most, especially abortion, but birth control, no. People are hearing God sees the heart. Yeah, God sees the heart. You guys don't really think about what that phrase means. God sees the heart. That means it doesn't mean, well, I had good intentions and God sees my intentions. No, God sees what is in the root of your heart. And if you're using birth control, it's selfishness. That's not, when you really get down to what the cause of our sin is, it's all rooted in vanity, selfishness. I don't want another kid because it's going to cost me too much, things like that. But people hear that phrase, God sees the heart, and they think, oh, he'll see my intentions.
Nonsense. They just have a false God then. That's the thing. We've made a false God, this God that never judges, never condemns, never throws anybody into hell.
That is the God being presented to them by
Exactly. And
one
it's a
holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So
and it's a
I
false god
wonder if
because it doesn't
I wo-
exist.
okay, but I wonder if some of the man, dude, when I do this show late at night, I forget words.
That's okay.
Culpability. I wonder if some of the culpability is relieved because the institution that is supposed to be teaching is not properly teaching. You know, like I think one of the marks of somebody who is Orthodox Catholic, it's like one of the first things you do is you throw the birth control out. It's like, I'm not on birth control. This teaching is the hardest teaching in our modern world. And when you throw it out, it's like, okay, I'm going to embrace one of the most difficult crosses that comes in our life. Right.
Yeah.
So I think all the people that are using it are yes, it's a false, it's a God that they're comfortable with.
It's a
like,
god they've made up in their mind. Like,
yeah,
like in Psalm 49 says,
it's a God in their own image.
yeah, God chastises the people of Israel in Psalm 49 because he says, you've been partakers with adulterers, you've gone in the way of thieves, you've gone in the way of murderers, and you've made me as if I was one of you. In other words, you've made me as if I was just another man who tolerated all of your evil that you're going about. And that's the thing. Like, God is, on the one hand, the good father in Luke 15 who comes to the prodigal son. But the prodigal son has repentance. He's also the same God who, in the book of the Apocalypse, John fell on his face at the wrath of the Lamb. Like, it's the same God. We can't de-emphasize or overemphasize one or the other.
Well,
What I see going on is that these people, if you genuinely believe that God is a God of surprises and we should discern morality, like, you're out to lunch.
it's an
Man,
overemphasis on mercy to the point where it's toxic, and
false mercy.
it's false mercy. It's the same thing we always talk about with confession, right? These priests that just give absolution willy-nilly without actually dealing with the root of the problem. We saw a post the other day. It was a kid who got his girlfriend pregnant. He said fiance. I got my fiance pregnant, and I was going to the priest, and when I was confessing that we were sleeping together, the priest said, don't come back in here with the same sin week after week. Now, he presented it as if that's what the priest said, but I think the priest probably said, look, you don't have a firm purpose of amendment. You're sleeping at the girl's house. You're coming in week after week telling me you slept with your girlfriend just so you can receive communion. Like, you can't do that. You can't come in here, get absolution so you can receive communion, and then you go back to sleeping with your girlfriend. Like, you're using the confessional as a revolving door at that point, right? So
it's just invalid because you don't actually have true contrition. It's just you're using it as almost a get out of hell free card, more or less, to get stuff.
So the thing